Hello, my friends, and welcome to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning. So glad to be back with you here today. Today's episode is probably 2 years in the making. My guest today is the one and only Dr. Traci Baxley. She is a professor, consultant, parenting coach, speaker, and mother to 5 children. She is the creator of Social Justice Parenting and the author of an incredible book, a must-have, Social Justice Parenting, How to Raise Compassionate, Anti-Racist, Justice-Minded Kids in an Unjust World. She has been an educator for over 30 years. She has degrees in child development, elementary education, and curriculum and instruction. She specializes in belonging, diversity and inclusion, anti-bias curriculum, and social justice education. And Dr. Baxley is here with us today.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Dr. Baxley, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm glad we were able to make this work.
I am so excited. I'm so excited to have you here. We met years ago. I can't believe we're already saying years ago. And, so much has changed in both of our lives since we met. And one of the most incredible things that has happened in your life, outside of your family, of course, is the book that you wrote on social justice parenting. So I cannot wait to dive into that book and talk a little bit about it. And I think I want to just first say that it was just an incredible read. And it's one of those books that you can't just read once. I feel like I have to read it again and then revisit it over and over again as things kind of pop up. But so much of what you wrote resonated with me as a mom of 2 Black children and as a person whose elementary school, high school, and undergraduate experience was similar to what you described in the book. I was the only Black person in most of my classes, most of my educational experience, and one of a handful until I went to graduate school. And so, it's so interesting. I was like reading your book and I'm nodding and recognizing that experience. And I just want to thank you first for writing the book. You talk about creating a better, safer, and more inclusive world for our children. And that resonated with me as a mom, but also resonated with me as a founder of a company who's really trying to advocate for people who think and learn differently. And so I feel like your book transcends, ethnicity and race and can be applicable to so many, other groups. But could you talk first about what you mean by social justice parenting? Because that is the title of your book. Let's start there.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Karen. And I agree. When I look at both of our lives, there's so much intersection between who we are as people, as educators, as moms. I definitely see a huge connection between the two of us. I think that's why we kind of clicked the minute we met each other years ago. But thank you for the feedback of the book, and I really appreciate you reading it. But social justice parenting really came out of the idea of really, being a Black mom and wanting to, on a selfish note, provide safe space for my children to live in a world that is very racialized. But it's also about us growing as parents together. And really, like you're saying, it's not just really for parents, it's really for anybody who has children in their lives. And it's really this way of being intentional and purposeful in the way that we're raising our children to be more self confident and be able to self-advocate, to be more compassionate and kind, and to really kind of lean into the ideas of social engagement or activism. So how do we parent our children so that they really will be prepared, not just to be adults in the world, but to really be change agents in that world that we are trying to create for them?
Absolutely. And that change agent focus is so important right now. We've seen it over the last 2 years, but, more and more, I think our kids, even at a younger age, are more socially aware of what's happening in the world around them.
Yeah. And sometimes more than the parents.
Absolutely. In your book, you describe many mom moments, what I describe as many mom moments that many parents can relate to. And you to use your own experience to discuss parenting from a position of fear and complacency versus a place of courage and radical love. And I would love for you to dig into the difference between that, because I think as a parent, we've all had those moments where we are parenting from a place of fear and from a place of, this is how, our parents did things. This is how my parents did things. So I'm just going to parent the same way. But you really talk about the importance of parenting from a place of courage and of radical love. Can you talk about that? Because I think that's just so important.
Yeah, I think, like you said, we all want to protect our kids to a certain extent, right? We let our own life experiences, our own biases, our own childhood memories and practices as little kids really become the guiding light for how we parent. And sometimes that is based in all these fears of others. It's fear of changing the way we parent from our own parents. It's a fear of exposing our kids to things that we think are hard. It's a fear of our kids maybe asking us questions that we don't know the answers to. So we want to try to kind of contain their curiosities in some ways. But I think when we do that, we really are protecting our kids from growing, right, and from learning about the world. Keeping them safe is really not leaning into truth. And I think it's really important as parents that we teach our kids the truth so that when they go out in the world, that they're not using what they learn in the world to kind of be their guiding light, right? To be the thing that they use as a way of learning about the world. And I think I really want everybody to lean more into this idea of radical love, which is really kind of like this unconditional love that we use ways of showing up that is open and expansive. It's not limiting, like our fears are often limiting, right? So radical love is fueled by this idea of compassion and understanding for us as human beings. That really helps us to promote this idea of healing and growing and learning about each other. And I think when we try to move in a space of radical love, you're right, it's more expansive and it's more inclusive. And the more that we're teaching our children to do that, and the more that we're practicing that, it becomes, I think, more normalized for our children, right? And I think it's this idea of using this love to fuel our dialogue that we have with our kids, or the intentional way that we show up in our parenting practices. And it's really about, being able to reflect in a more transformative way, and really seeing the humanness in people all around us, expansive of their identities. And like you said, it's not just about race and ethnicity, but it's about all of these identities that we hold and being accepted, and seeing people for all of who they are.
Yes. And when you talk about, that fear versus courage, you think of every parent wants to protect their child. And I think that's where you start in your book. We want them to feel safe and we want to protect them. And it takes a lot of courage to reveal truths to them about the world. But we also give them the tools to self-advocate when we do position ourselves from a place of courage and radical love, because that radical love also means embracing differences. And so many of the kids that I work with, as a clinical psychologist, parents are wanting to keep their kids safe because they fear their kids are going to be stigmatized or they're going to be shunned because of their difference. And they want to protect them, right? Because they're already facing enough hardships in their school, on the playground, on the soccer field, and they want to protect them. But we also have to instill that courage not only in the way we parent, but in our children, that they have to be courageous as well.
Yes, and I think part of that is building those skills of self-advocacy, right? And I know, My own children, I have children with various neurological differences, right? I have, my one son who has ADHD. I have one child who is beating depression, and I have another son who was diagnosed with OCD, with intrusive thoughts. So, those differences matter to me too, right? It's not just about race, like you're saying. And one thing that I try to instill in my kids, this idea of standing in their own truths, right? All of who they are, including those labels that people want to put on them. How do we use those labels for something positive? How do we use those labels to show up for others? And that idea of self-advocacy is really important for parents who have children with all of these differences that we teach our kids when we're not around, right? They're able to do that for themselves and able to use those labels and see all the positive and the wonderfulness that comes along with some of those labels.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important, and beyond the label is that's part of who you are. And from from reading your book about embracing the whole child and loving, again, that radical love, is that this is part of you, but it doesn't define you.
Yeah. And I think it's important also, just, as an educator, when I taught in the classroom, seeing parents not wanting to see who their kids really are, right? They have these ideas of the kids that I'm going to raise, the people that I'm giving birth to, right? And those may not be the children that you actually have. And so I think it's really important for parents to be open to seeing all of who their kids are, and using the help that's needed, if needed, right, to make sure they have the support. But I think I always say, we need to parent the kids that we have and not the kids that we thought we would have. And sometimes that's very, very hard for parents. But I think when you start to accept all of who your child is, it really makes their path easier. And it makes it easier for you as a parent to be able to, like you said, have the courage and be able to use that radical love in a way that really gets the best out of your child. I know my third child, my second son, has ADHD. And when those labels were seen as negative in schools, I pulled him out of school for a year to homeschool him. And we did a whole unit on what ADHD is. Like, what does that look like? What does that mean for you? What are the wonderful things that are a part of you because of that? And how do you stand in that and showing people who you are and how to be treated because of that? And what you can't use as an excuse, because of that. But I think, getting our kids, us accepting, right, who our kids really are, and then learning to teach our kids to stand in that as well and to embrace all of who they are is really important. And that's all part of social justice parenting as well.
Right. And that's so empowering to the child, right? It's about standing in your truth and knowing that you are surrounded by that radical love that you describe. And and as parents, we have to also give ourselves some grace, because I know any parent on any given day, you can easily regress to parenting out of fear. Correct?
Absolutely. Yes. It's a daily task, right? Yes. And I think the most important part about that is the self-reflection, as a parent, to always give yourself the grace, but also be in a place of reflecting on the way we show up, the way that we talk to our children, the way that we are parenting our children, so that when we do need the grace, right, when we do things that are outside of what is important to us, what our values are, that we are able to see that as quickly as possible and be able to get back in alignment with what's true for us as a family.
Right. And you talk about that when you talk about your rocks of social justice parenting, that reflection, and then that open dialogue with your child. And I think even when we have those moments where we parent out of fear, we may yell when we don't want to yell. It's about repairing that and going back and having that open dialogue with your child about that experience, and not just letting them walk out the door and then come back in after school like nothing happened.
Yeah, I think that you hit it. The key, right, is the repairing. That we're going to make mistakes. We're all human. We're raising humans, so they're going to make mistakes too. But I think it is really important that as parents, we recognize when we stepped out of alignment with our core values, and that we owe our children, really, right? That space where we can say that we've messed up and that we're coming to them, asking for forgiveness and telling them that we're going to show up differently. But I think acknowledging when we've done something that's out of alignment is really important for our kids, because it's teaching them that they're going to make mistakes and how to handle those mistakes when they do.
Absolutely. And that really speaks to, the modeling of that behavior, because, so many parents that I've spoken to who have kids who think and learn differently, who experience the world in a different way. They talk about how frustrating it can be. I think one of the descriptions you described about waiting in the car and your son wasn't, where he was supposed to do. And all parents have that experience where they're looking at the clock. They know they have to be out of the house, and they may have a child who's kind of, dawdling or got distracted for whatever reason. And they can yell, and they can, become frustrated and get angry. And again, I think again, it's about showing yourself some grace, but like you said, reflecting on what was that about, and then having that open dialogue with your child and realizing that, and modeling again, that everybody makes mistakes. Is when you come back to your child and say, I was just really frustrated. I have a lot on my mind today. That's not, how I'd like to do things in the future. I would love to, I should have handled it in a different way. And this is how I might have liked to handle it. This would have been a better way to handle it. But again, that open dialogue is so powerful.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, not just for the relationship that you're building with your children, but the relationships your children will build with other people, right? So that modeling and that talking it through, really, those examples are the things that your children are going to remember when they are interacting with people in the world. And so I think the more that we can do that and talk through some of the things that we do wrong, also talk through some of our decision making out loud, our children really get a feel for how to do that when they're not in your presence. And I think the more we can do that, the more experience they have with that, the more that they're able to use their own voices in the home, right? Explaining their truths, explaining the way that they thought, and allowing them to have that safe space to do it, the better that they're going to be at doing that in the world when things are not, everybody's not necessarily in their corner, or that people may not understand who they are, or may not agree with their decisions and their views, that they'll have that as a tool, that because they know what that looks like in the home, and they're able to use that when they're out in the world. So I think the more that we can talk to our children about these things and unpack our ways of thinking and our ways of showing up is really powerful for our children.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, these are such core values in terms of, how we want to interact with our kids, how we want them to show up in the world, and how we show up for them. And like I was saying, that I think your book touches on raising justice-minded kids, not only in the context of ethnicity and race, but also ability level, learning differences, mental health challenges. And one thing that struck me that I think that made that so clear to me is that one of the core things you discuss, and it's a need for all people and children, is that need to belong, right? That need to belong in their family, in the classroom, in your community. Can you talk about that need for belonging? Because I think that's central to, what you stand for.
Yeah. And listen, especially when you have children who learn differently, right? That is so important, because there are going to be times in their lives where they feel different, right? They feel like the way that they show up, the way that they learn, the way that they do things are different from others, and they may not feel included. But I think belonging to me is just a basic human right, right? It's something that when you're looking at the hierarchy of needs, basic human rights and the need to belong and be loved is one of those basic needs that we don't necessarily think about, but it's the building block for everything else in it, right? They can't get to self-actualization until they feel like they belong. And so I think it's up to us as parents, as caregivers, as people, when these children are in our lives, to really be the first place where they feel safe and where they feel like they belong. And when we create belonging in our homes, our kids really go out into the world and they become those safe spaces for other people. So I think we have to be intentional about how we create safe spaces at our home, in our homes. Now, for some kids, that may be a physical safe space, right? They may need a space that has specific sensory things in there. They may need an empty space that they can kind of download things, or a soft space to land. That may be something for their safe space. A safe space also may be like a psychological safe space where they know they can come talk to you, where they know that they can unpack, they can make mistakes, they can scream, because that's a place where they can scream safely, or whatever that looks like for your child. Of course, will be different, based on your child's needs. But for us to be intentional about creating these safe spaces for our children is really the premise for them feeling like they belong. And I think as we are learning who our kids are and what their needs are, it changes as they change. And we have to be more mindful and more tuned in that, is this a place where my child feels like they can unpack? Is this a place where my child feels like they can have open dialogue with the things that they're feeling, or when they're hurting? Do we talk about emotions and feelings, and are we emotionally available for our children when they need us? I always ask my kids when they want to talk, am I listening as a mom, or is my listening as a friend or a sounding board? Because, as a mama bear, I'm going to show up very differently for my kids. And so I want to create a safe space and a place where they feel like they can come to me whichever way they need me to listen. So I think belonging is really the key to all of these other things, and creating the safe spaces so that they feel that sense of belonging is something that we have to work at and be intentional about.
Absolutely. And of course, that's important in the home. But I guess one of the great things about your book is that other people who are in your child's life, if you're a parent, if they read this book, they also can help create a sense of belonging in the community in which your child lives. So if that's a neighbor, if that is a teacher, if that is a soccer coach, they can also help nurture that and cultivate that sense of belonging.
Yes, that's really important. And it's really important for us as parents to teach our children how to create that village, right? That we help our kids know who they are and what their needs are, right? To be able to articulate those needs. And the other part of that, that whole idea of self-advocacy is, who do I need in place to help me to meet my needs? Like, what does that team look like? Who is that at school? Is it the guidance counselor? Is it the assistant principal? Is it my math teacher? Who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to know that's in place? So when I'm having a hard time or things are going wrong, this is my team of people away from home. So helping kids build those teams is really important. I know with my son who has high anxiety, I talked about it in the book too, that he and I sat down and said, okay, I am your team, yes. But when you're at school, you have to develop a team of people that you can go to when your anxiety is getting high, or when you feel like you need to bolt out of the room or whatever. And so we had a conversation with which teacher, right? It was his assistant principal who was his go-to person, who also lived with a spouse who had the same diagnosis as my son, which really worked out because she knew strategies already to help him with. So if we had not talked to her, we would know that she would be the team member that we really needed when Trace needed support. And so I think it's really important, like you said, in the community who comes in contact with our children, it's important that we're on the same page, right? That we are really building that village together so that everybody knows our kids and we know how to show up for them when they need it.
Absolutely. And that is so important, because we can provide the safest space at home, but our children spend so much time outside the home unless they're homeschooled, right? And so we want that compassion to extend beyond our home and our house.
Yes. And then that's how we start building those communities of care, right? The compassionate communities. Yes.
And that village that you talk about, You want a village of compassionate people, people who are going to be there and show up for your child. And you also talk about kindness. And I think that is just such a core value for any human being to have. And I love how you describe it as kindness being compassion in action, that it's not about just feeling for another person, but how does that show up in what you do on a daily basis?
Yeah, and how are we building those habits at home, right? Because they transfer to the way we show up in our communities. And I also think it's really important too that we are focused on self-compassion and self-kindness, which as parents, especially moms, right? That's something new for us. That's something sometimes it feels uncomfortable. And I'm learning that every day. Every day I'm trying to do a little bit better with being kind to myself because that's what our kids see first. And then like you're saying, how do we extend that then to showing kindness with our kids showing kindness in our homes, and then how do we take that and that we create kindness in our communities? Doesn't take a lot, right? There's little things that we are teaching our kids and building on that really can change our community, change the schools that our kids are in by doing these small acts or these small habits. But they're important, right? They have great rippling effects in our communities and in our world.
Absolutely. And again, it comes back to modeling. You're modeling as a parent, as an adult, you're modeling, that compassion in action, those kindness acts for your children, and not even just your children, but the children who see you, right? Who see you in their community. And, one of the things you also talk about is kind of moving from a place of reflection, open dialogue, compassion, kindness to engagement. And so it's an action, right? Social justice engagement and kind of modeling that advocacy. And there are little things that parents can do, teachers can do, neighbors can do to be part of that movement. I would love for you to just give us a couple things. If parents are listening and I'm going to recommend that everybody get your book, but if they're listening right now and say, I want to just, after listening to this, do one thing or do two things, what are some things, small steps that parents can do to help with the social justice engagement?
I think it should start like with the thing that you're passionate about. I think that's kind of the easiest transition, right, to being more active socially out and into the world, into your community. If your family is passionate about the environment, if you're passionate about an organization, I think that's really where you start. Like, what are the small things that your family can do to think about other people and to take action to make life for somebody else a little bit better? And it could be something simple as, volunteering or collecting supplies for an organization, or, writing letters to people in power that you want to make a difference. It could be start with your principal. Maybe the principal or the leadership in your school is not, if it's not inclusive enough, or that you are wanting certain curricula in your school that you feel that are not being there. So it's small things in your own lives that you feel that could be better for somebody else. Then I think that those are the things that you can do. And I also think we call them like micro kindness acts, little things like smiling, right? There's so many people who are so sad and they have such heavy lives. Just smiling and engaging with people, you don't know how that can change somebody's life or somebody's day. So it doesn't have to be anything major. It's just like making an effort to say, our family has these things. What can we do in our lives that can support somebody who may not have those things? Or what can we do in our lives to make the earth better, or to do something small that can maybe change the people around you? So it doesn't have to be anything major. It could be very small actions. But like you said in the beginning when you asked the question, the idea is that we're always taking small actions. We're showing our children what a small action can do, not only in making us feel better about what we're doing, right? But it also has a rippling effect to impact the people who are the recipients of that. And there's studies that show that people who even just watch kindness happen, even when they're not involved in the exchange, the serotonin in their brains, the endorphins, it all is the same, whether you're involved, whether you're receiving it, or whether you're watching it. So I think the rippling impact that we have is so much greater than we think it does, even when the acts are very, very small.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just want to thank you again for writing this book, because I think you've really given the world a gift by writing this book. It's exceptional. I think every parent, aunt, uncle, neighbor, classroom teacher should read it. We're going to put a link to it in the show notes. And I appreciate you. I appreciate all the work that you're doing. It's such important work, and your work has rippling effects to parents, to communities, and to the children whose lives are touched by people who act on what you've recommended and talked about in this book. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. I really appreciate it. And I love the work that you're doing in the world too. You're making a great difference for parents and giving them the resources they need to show up for their children. Right. I think our missions are very similar.
Very much aligned. Thank you so much. I really appreciated speaking with you today. And again, I just applaud all the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.